I have to first of all admit I'm not just a novice at this, I'm an absolute ignoramus. There was another moderator that was meant to do this, which has fallen through at the last minute. But I just read what they were doing backstage, and it's completely blown my mind. It scared me, and of course filled one with hope. And I just want to introduce Dr. Gregory Stock and Dr. Naresh Trehan. Gregory will then be giving us a small presentation because this is really beyond our imagination, and it's better we know a little about what he's working with before we can start to discuss it. Gregory Stock is a professor at the University of California, but he's also written 2 books called Redesigning the Human Race and also Re-engineering the Germline. All of that at this moment may sound like algebra to you. 15 minutes later, your circuitry is going to be blown. Of course, Dr. Naresh Trehan in India needs no introduction. He's our most preeminent cardiac surgeon. He's also the first doctor of the country. He serves the president. He's done more than 50,000 heart surgeries in his career. He set up escorts. And currently, he's setting up the most cutting-edge sort of coordinated medical center in Gurgaon called Medanta. So please welcome Gregory Stock and Naresh Trehan, and Gregory, your presentation.
Thank you. It's really good to be here. And what I'm going to try and do in the next 15 minutes is to try to give you a sense of the context of the changes that are taking place in the life sciences and in general, so that you can get a feel for what it really means, what's happening today. And what's occurring is that there are such amazing possibilities. You hear about them in the news all the time. And it is really something that is fundamental in terms of the trajectory of life itself that is occurring. There are issues of human embryonic stem cells. There's pharmacogenomics, where people are tailoring drugs to our individual genetic constitutions. And what is really occurring, let me see if this works. What is really occurring is that as a whole, these things are leading to almost an awakening. It is really a transition in the history of life. And let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by that, is that this is not just about human history. This is going to be looked back on 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years from now, as a fundamental transition in life. And there are 2 things that are absolutely unprecedented that are occurring today. The first of these is the Silicon Revolution. Yeah, this doesn't seem to work very well. And we're familiar with all the products of that. What's actually occurring, if you step back a little bit, is that we're taking the silicon dioxide, the sand, the inert sand at our feet that we walk on, and we're breathing a level of complexity into it that rivals life itself. What that means is that we're animating the inanimate world around us. Unprecedented. And as a child of that revolution, we're beginning to understand the processes of life at such an intimate level that we're beginning to intervene in those processes. And it's beginning slowly, but you can see where the trajectory is leading us. And it's leading us to take control of our evolutionary future. And that is a huge, huge thing. And the last time it happened was about 500 million years ago, when simple cells and tissue basically learned to organize simple non-biology, calcium carbonate, calcium phosphate, in order to create shells and bones that allowed the large body plans that we're aware of. It created ourselves. And another way of seeing what's occurring today is that now complex, it doesn't seem to work for that. Complex biology, our cerebral cortices, and complex non-biology, all of the computer chips and everything, are coming together in a very intimate fashion to create a global superorganism, an entity that is richly interconnected, just like the cells in our own body. That is the reality of what is occurring today. And so, this thing doesn't work very well. Technology doesn't always work all that well. What it's doing is it's blurring a lot of boundaries. It's changing it's blurring the line between therapy and enhancement. It's blurring the lines between the born and the made. Essentially, we have things like synthetic life that Craig Venter created last year. We have this fellow, Oscar Pistorius. He can run a 100-meter dash in 11 seconds. He has no lower legs. We have this woman here who is able to move a prosthetic simply by thinking what she wants to do, and the nervous signals are picked up in her chest. These are the very earliest baby steps, but you get the direction of what is occurring. And so we argue about cloning, about genetic engineering, but the reality, the depth of the issue that we're really facing is whether carbon-based, carbon and nitrogen tissue, flesh, is going to be transcended by the children of silicon. And there can be strong arguments that it will be. But for us, what really matters is our understandings in biology, because cut us open, and this is what we are, as we know very well. We're flesh and blood. But the understandings that we have about genetics and biology, that's who we are. So as we begin to get these understandings, we're talking about changing ourselves, about altering ourselves. And that's a very dramatic thing. It's kind of freaky, but think of the external world and the places that we've created all over the world that are these valleys of concrete and stainless steel and glass. This is not the Pleistocene, this is not the stomping ground of our Pleistocene ancestors. This is a new environment that we've created. And we're continuing to do these sorts of things with amazing architecture like this. And we're also, these tools are becoming more potent, more precise, more minuscule, and we're turning them back on our own selves. And before we're done, it's going to reshape medicine, and it's going to change ourselves in very, very deep ways. This next journey, we thought it was going to be out into space, Star Trek. We were going to go outside. It's not. It's an inner journey. That's really what the next thing is, because that's what we really care about. It's ourselves. So this is a journey into ourselves, and it's going to be an amazing exploration that is occurring. The possibilities are immense. There are three basic ways that we're going to reshape ourselves. One is our biology, one is the way we handle our minds, our mental processes, and the other is reproduction, and they've already begun. So is changing our biology some goofy stuff like this, like wings or something? No, this is Hollywood or Bollywood or wherever. But think of something that we actually care about, like aging. If you could actually control the process of aging, alter the process of aging to add extra years of vitality rather than decrepitude, would we want that? I mean, it's very easy when you're young to imagine that you're immortal and you're unaware of the trajectory of life. But even somebody like Mick Jagger, who takes care of himself so well, there becomes a day when you realize that, actually time is not going to pass you by. And if we could make that kind of an intervention, which is quite plausible, mainstream biogerontologists say, a number of them have said that the first person to live to be 150 years ago is likely already alive today. It will transform everything about society if that occurs. The second area that I mentioned was our minds. So Viagra, Prozac, again, little baby steps that we influence the way we're thinking. But what if the nuances of our understandings of the mind, of the brain, of biochemistry, if we could create a cocktail of interventions that actually made you feel completely fulfilled without doing anything, without side effects? You were just happy to be you doing whatever you're doing. Would you be able to resist taking that intervention? I suspect not. But who would you be if you didn't resist that? So that's going to be very, very challenging to us. And then the third is our children. As we begin to understand what the meanings are of genetics, what the constellation of genes that shape us, what it means about our temperament, our personality, our potentials, our vulnerabilities, we're going to want to make those choices. And I think that, people are going to increasingly, I would predict, see that that choice about the genetic constitutions of our children is something that's too important to just leave to chance. Just a moment. It's hard to have a lot of images when you can't move them forward. So the question is, is any of this real? In the year 2000, when the Human Genome Project was occurring, there were stories of all these great things that were going to happen. And what's really happened? People still die of heart disease and cancer. There isn't even a decent drug for Alzheimer's. It doesn't seem to have led anywhere. And there were these great promises, but where are all these wonder drugs that everybody talked about at the time? And so one could wonder whether it's going to happen at all. Certainly it's not because of the lack of spending. Here we're talking about spending moving towards about $50 billion a year in the pharmaceutical industry, but the number of new drugs, and particularly the ones of innovative new drugs, is constant or declining. Sorry. So, you know, this was supposed to be the book of life, the code of codes. What happened? Why are we having such problems? And the real question is, when is this image of sort of medicine in the future going to have any reality in the present? And I would argue that it's going to be sooner than you think, because there are many, many developments that are occurring in different areas that have great synergies, and they're all occurring simultaneously. And when they come together, there will be enormous consequences. It's kind of like a piece of paper. You take a piece of paper and you heat it up, and it warms up, it gets warmer, it gets warmer, it gets a little darker, nothing happens, and then suddenly, poof, it bursts into flame. And that's what is about to happen. And the thing that is occurring is that information about ourselves, rich information, is becoming so cheap that it can be taken rather broadly. The most obvious case of that is in genomics, where the price of sequencing our genomes, reading our genetic sequence, has decreased 5 orders of magnitude in the last 10 years. In that graph, you can see what's happened in computers, and we know how rapidly they've gone. In biology, it's gone even more rapidly. And here's an example of a person I know in Europe, an entrepreneur. He spent $250,000 to sequence his own genome. Didn't have very much information that was of use to him, but right now, you could do the same thing for $8,000. And if you wait a little while, you'll be able to do it probably for under $1,000, for maybe $100. So the cost of this information is beginning to be essentially free. And how to use it is what the challenge is. There's this explosion, it's this tsunami of information that is just deluging us. And the amount of medical information that is produced is going up by tenfold every few years. So this is enormous, and when we begin to make sense of that, it's going to have significant implications. Lee Hood will probably get a Nobel Prize. He's running an institute called the Systems Biology Institute. He was the creator of the genetic sequencer, okay, that underlies the Human Genome Project. And what he thinks we'll do very shortly, within 10 to 15 years, is that we will go in on every 6 months, and we will read the status of tens of thousands of cells in our bodies. We will be looking at thousands of the surfaces of many, many different proteins, of the proteins on the surfaces of many, many different immune cells. We'll be looking at the different genes that are expressed, essentially hundreds of millions of bits of information that we'll be taking on ourselves in a healthy state twice a year. And this will happen with microtechnology, where you're talking about a fraction of a drop of blood. It'll be happening on a very automated scale, in an automated way. And it'll be coupled with physiological sensors that you can already, this exists today. That thing on the tip of a finger is basically where something that monitors the arterial pressure. So if you're at risk of a heart attack, you could have that would monitor your arterial pressure and send it out to a detector, to something that's analyzing that information. So it's basically transforming medicine into an information science in a way that has never been meaningful. Previously, you could get little bits of information. They weren't of very much use at all. And that's going to have an enormous amount of impact on medicine. It's going to make it more predictive. It's going to make it relate to ourselves as individuals. It's going to make it deal with prevention because of that, the possibilities of this knowledge. And it's going to require our participation, our engagement with our health and decisions we make about what we do with this information on a regular basis. And it's creating a new aspect to healthcare. It's going to be proactive. It's going to be centered around information technology. That is going to be the challenge of the next generation, is to make sense of this. It's going to happen relatively soon. And the surprising thing is that not only will it be revolutionary in that it will really sweep away medicine as it exists today, at least Western medicine, but it's going to be inexpensive and it's going to be available to virtually everyone. And the reason for that is that while it is terribly expensive to create these technologies, tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. Once they're created, the incremental cost of using them for various people is almost zero. And in fact, the value of them is increased when more people use them. So it really is a virtuous circle. It's kind of, and they're way beyond individual capabilities. I mean, physicians will be able to contribute a part of that knowledge, but it will be a body of knowledge that is beyond this, that is processed by computational, by expert systems, and it is going to somehow be embodied in an interface in a way that we can communicate and access this in a way that is natural to us through speech. It'll be like having this very, very wise physician uncle in some way, and whoever can crack this problem and can create these kinds of things is going to essentially be shaping about 20% of the global GDP, because this is going to be something that everybody is going to want. And I said it's going to be a revolution, and I said it's not going to be for the rich, which everybody likes to think it's really going to bifurcate society. I'll show you why it's not. Let's take an example of the internet. If one person has access to the internet because they're so rich and they create this thing, it is absolutely useless. It's because it's sharing information among us all. That's what's really important about it. And the same thing is true with cell phone technology. With cell phone technology, here was the first mobile phone. Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, a kilogram, and you can use it for less than half an hour. So this is what the masters of the universe had 25 years ago. Now, Maasai tribesmen have something that can put that to shame. If you look at cell phone, who would have thought 20 years ago that India would have a better phone system than the United States? Okay? You cannot get cell phone coverage when you wander around. So there's leapfrogging that occurs for societies. And I think that the same thing is not only possible, but is likely to occur in medicine and healthcare, because there are sclerotic, highly regulated systems that exist in the United States and Europe that are very difficult to change. And the challenge as we explore this next frontier is not to follow. It's about taking all of this information, thinking of creative ways that we can use that and that we can make it of value to ourselves, and creating new systems, new architectures. And there's a great advantage in having the ability to construct a new system that you can put in place. It really can leapfrog the possibilities that will exist in existing systems. So that's my message to India and to us as individuals. And my final slide. So this is something that has started. We don't have a clue as to where it's going to take us. Anybody who tells you that they think they know where this is going to be in 100 years is dreaming. Okay, I think about this stuff a lot. I don't have a clue. But the situation is that this is a transition that is fundamental to life. And people, whoever or whatever they are, that look back at this 100,000 years from now are going to look at this moment in time, of which we have the privilege to be here right now, and they're going to say, what a glorious, what a romantic moment. That was the moment that the very foundation, the very shape of our lives was laid down. And we have the privilege of observing it, we have the privilege of participating in it, and the challenge is that we are the objects of all this. It's our health, it's our future, it's our children, it's our world. And that's why we care so much about it, and that's why the debates are so aggressive and strong. So thank you very much.
He spoke of hope. I'm petrified, doctor. As a doctor, I mean, if I were to just crystallize a lot of what Gregory spoke about, I think the one that really will impact the audience is the idea that at an embryonic stage, you can intervene and change the way your child looks, the height, the IQ, compassion, color, gender. As a doctor, does that frighten you or does that give you hope?
You're right to be scared, but I'm somewhere in between. What an elegant presentation, which is exhorting all of us to actually look at the future and the hope of it. But let me talk about the duality of science. If you look at, say, nuclear energy, the idea of fission, the idea of theory of relativity from Einstein onwards culminated in the bomb which changed the whole shape of World War II. It was then taken into clean and cheap energy, which was for the human being. Then it converted into proliferation, and now we are worried about the dirty bomb. So it's done a full circle. So we need to really, when we look at these sort of sciences, biosciences, which we are talking about right now, as practitioners of medicine, it behooves us to actually sift them out into 3 blocks. Science for the sake of science, science for humanity, and science against humanity. So we are talking about sequencing this whole thing to say what are the outcomes that we should look for hundreds of years down the line, or maybe decades down the line at least. You take the other technology that came out was sonar signals, which culminated into ultrasonography, which has saved many, many lives by detecting disease inside us at an early stage. Then it went on to fetal imaging, and then it went on to female feticide. Today, if you look at the social impact of that, there are states in India where the gender ratio has gone down from 1,000 men to 740 women. You can imagine the consequences of that if you perpetrate it indefinitely. The other fact that is scary is the fact that in the less than 10 years, we have added another billion people to our planet. Are we ready to take on another few billion in the coming years where we can genetically engineer, we can clone, we can do all sorts of things? So these are questions which we actually have to look very carefully down the line before we give the last hurrah to it. Ultimately, you look at the positive side of it. Bioengineering, biosciences have produced so much relief to humanity by way of vaccines, by way of manipulating some of the genes where you know exactly the disease process is going to happen. It's not perfected yet, but it has potential. But you take IVF, which is a live bioscience, the in vitro fertilization, it added joy to millions of people's lives by the petri dish baby. But then you had the cloned dolly, the famous sheep. It went on to develop arthritis, it went on to develop liver disease. So if you unleash science without it being tested out through the process of some of it is well regulated, some of it is not. But then there is always the dark side of this world where people will run with that, like Clonade is one of the companies that ran with the cloning. We don't even know whether it's actually true or not, but has made millions of dollars, made promises to hundreds of thousands of people saying how they will clone them. So what is the consequence of cloning? You talk about, here you could have 100 Sachins running around all over the world, out of every stadium winning the match for India. And on the other hand, you could have an Osama in every state. So where are you going to exercise that regulation on the side of caution, because unbridled science will have a very devastating effect on the world as we go. So
it's not just the idea of Osama, a million Osamas. It's terrifying to imagine that there might be a million Sachin Tendulkars, you know. I mean, who do you respect? Who do you admire? You know, we'll just have perfect human beings walking around.
One more point I'd like to make here is that about looking young. I think it's the most overrated virtue in the world today. We spend millions of dollars going to Greece looking at the Acropolis. As an ancient, what's wrong with looking at Mick Jagger? Nothing wrong with that. So I would say, add life to years, not years to life, because we are also guilty of extending life unnecessarily, dragging people out at the last stage of their life, where the emotion of the family does not allow them to give up. And we perpetrated to drag them on and on and on in the last year or years of their life. I think that's the debate, moral debate, in perspective with the biology that is developing.
I'm just going to... We in this hall seem to be in a minority, because I was just reading that there's been a survey about whether people would welcome what is called germinology choice, this personal choice of how you will construct your baby at an embryonic stage. And according to Gregory, embryonic screening, which means that you can choose which embryo to develop, is already happening, and in 5 years will be very common practice. And in this survey, 80% of Indians said that they would love to have this science at their disposal, and that itself is frightening, you know. But Gregory, I believe there's a ban on some of these researches, and you feel that it's a bad idea because it's going to develop in any case, and it's better that it's developed out in the open than that it goes underground?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We talk about these things as though we are sort of godlike sitting outside of this process. It's a very messy process. It's something that is moving forward. I look at myself as a person that's observing and trying to understand what is occurring and what the implications are and ways that we can nudge it in ways that sort of serve us and serve our values. And there's often, especially in the bioethical community, people say, well, we don't want that to occur. I think we should ban cloning, or we should stop genetic interventions, or we don't want people to be able to screen their prospective, an embryo that then would, so a prospective child. These things are going to be, and they are already, relatively easy. And there's not a distinction between the things that you would say, oh, that's scary, I don't really want to do that, and the things that you say, oh, well, we're putting in hundreds of billions of dollars to try to protect ourselves or cure cancer or delay the onset of various diseases. Sure, we want to add life to our years, okay? But the reality is that life expectancy was under 40 not so long ago. And people that live today are, when they die at 65 from cancer, we say, oh my God, they had such a long, you know, they had many years ahead of themselves that they could have enjoyed themselves. So no, you don't want to buy added years of decrepitude. Who wants that? In the United States, the biggest fear that older people have is that they're going to be captured by the medical system and tortured to death. Because that's literally what we do to people today. But the idea that you could extend your vitality for extra time, be that within a normal lifetime framework because you take care of yourself or you're able to cure diseases at a nascent level, or because you can shape the aging process itself, this is an aspiration. I would argue that if there were a pill that people could take that would give them an extra 10 to 20 years of vitality, that there is no way you could regulate that and stop people from taking it. Much as we might say, oh, the population is too large.
Why would you? You wouldn't even attempt to regulate technology or pharmaceuticals. So designer drugs, I think, need to be supported. But designer babies, I have my serious doubts.
Well, so with selection that occurs, you use the example, we use the example of imbalances in gender ratios. This isn't high tech. This is ultrasound and abortion that is going on in India.
No, now it is genetic engineering of in IVF. So you can choose the female fetuses. You can.
No, I know you can do
you're
that.
Not fetuses.
But what
you
I'm
can
saying
throw away those ova.
Is that without the more powerful technologies, the practice was still taking place.
Right.
And it was taking place on a broad scale. And why? It's because of the nature of our society. It's not the nature of the technology. In the United States, in the United States and Europe, the same choices are available, and there are more baby girls that are chosen than baby boys, because people think that girls are easier to raise and are taking over the world.
So that's exactly my point, that we have not only an ethical issue here, we have social and we have economic responsibility as practitioners of science. And we should look at it in different environments, and they work differently, and maybe the laws have to be also adjusted accordingly as we operate in different areas.
But Dr. Trehan and Gregory, I mean, I think something that he said which caught my attention was that can one really choose that, you know, you will go in one direction and curtail the impacts in another? For instance, on plastic surgery, you know, the fact that burns and everything that earlier could scar and disfigure people is today something that one can, you know, you can do that with plastic surgery, you can fix people. But recently, Tehelka did a cover story on the fact that in Raipur, There are people who are opting for plastic surgery on their faces, and they're choosing who they want to look like, Aishwarya Rai, Hema Malini, you know. And how do you distinguish? How can you push science in one direction and stop its impacts in the other?
So there will be collateral damage of almost everything you do in life. But are you going to leave it unregulated, or are you going to regulate it intelligently? So the old adage of don't mess with Mother Nature, I don't contribute to that, but I do contribute to the fact that carefully monitored, controlled messing with nature is desirable and also can be used tremendously for the benefit of human mankind, not only in their daily lives, in their later years in their life, but we must be careful that we cannot now multiply 7 billion people into 14 billion people in the next 2 decades, expect not to have mayhem in this world. So I think that responsibility we must recognize.
So if you're thinking that I don't believe that a regulatory framework is appropriate, yeah, I'm not. Of course we're going to regulate medicine, and of course we want to prevent the various procedures that will have really negative impacts on people. What I do think, though, is that we've got it wrong. That these technologies, in fact, we're over-regulating things that speak less to the realities that are emerging than to our own hopes and fears. And so wisdom does not come. It's purchased at a price, okay? And if somebody were to say, I think about these things a lot, and if somebody were to say, you know, create a regulatory structure, what do you think is the way that this should go forward? I would say, you know, I would get it wrong. I don't know, because there's so much that we don't know. So the issue is not to have to sit around and say, you know, I think that this might lead to that, which will lead to that, which will be something that I'm uncomfortable with. It's, these things are not like nuclear weapons where we're going to vaporize half of the planet. These things take many years to play out. In vitro fertilization, the same arguments were made about in vitro fertilization as are made of many other technologies. And now it's relatively commonplace. My own daughter was conceived in a petri dish, okay? The nature of these things only becomes clear after we begin to use them. And it usually starts off relatively slowly, and it's usually used by the wealthy initially. I look at that as not a problem. These are the test pilots. These are the guinea pigs for humanity, basically. And what other group would you want to use technology at an earlier stage? They're aware, they're able to take care of some of the problems that develop, and they basically help us to determine what is of value and what's not of value. And I'll tell you, all of this vision, this stuff, the things that I'm talking about, if they are not things that we ultimately decide are to our benefit, and I mean the common person, that this brings value to us, they will fade away. They'll turn out to be, you know, end of millennial hubris. But what people are afraid of, and what a lot of people are afraid of, is that they will be difficult for us to resist because they will be seen as of such value. The fact, the poll that you pointed out, that people will see this as an opportunity for them to, in the case of children, to somehow compensate for the genetic lottery that occurs and to prevent, generally these things are applied to avoid serious illness at the present. Enhancement is a very, very difficult and challenging thing and is not anywhere near the possibilities at present. So to me, it's sort of buying that information, developing a system where we collect information and don't throw it away about the challenges that are associated with the application of these technologies.
I couldn't agree with you more. I agree with you on all the facts that you said about the regulation and things like that. Point basically is, like, I'm quite deeply immersed in stem cells research. We are doing a lot of autologous work. We studied the embryonic stuff quite extensively and have held back because of the teratogenic possibilities of embryonic cell biology so far. So I'm saying that there are people who have used it. There are people who have shown no benefit of it. There are people who still claim there are benefits of it and made huge millions of dollars. So I think that the world needs to be just warned about the fact that don't jump on every wagon that comes by your way, which excites you by science, which gives you potential of making huge sums of money, and in the misbelief that you're going to be treating something which there is no proof for. So I think that if you can exercise these three things, then we are responsible researchers, then we are ones who are exploring science to its ultimate, but taking it in as it comes down the pike in a more safer and more proven form. So I'm with you on that.
No, sorry. Okay. The situation with the regulatory environment is such, is that if you look at what the incentives are for a person who is a bureaucrat, who is sitting, is trying to create and implement a regulatory framework, they actually get very little value out of accelerating a cure for a disease, because the damage that is caused by delays are very diffuse and uncertain. I mean, something that doesn't happen, there's not a constituency that's arguing about that. Where they're damaged is if there's an accident, if somebody gets hurt, even though we know that, for instance, medicines, they're poisons, they're dangerous. I mean, they're differentially poisoning different tissues generally. So this idea that there is going to be absolute safety that can be certified by some external agency, I think is a fantasy.
No, but there is a due process for it, by the way. There is a due process of science. The phase trials that you go phase 1, 2, 3, 4, if we subject ourselves to that, I think there is a lot of responsibility. But also you bring up this point that this is the major drawback of modern science or modern medicine as we practice. It has only three things: poison, cut it out, or blast it with the most powerful X-ray beam that you can get. It's effective but very destructive and very expensive. So it also behooves us to look the other way and say, what are the alternatives? Like Mr. Kapil Sibal was saying yesterday, India has to find its own solutions. And I believe it will come out of herbal medicine, a combination of herbal medicine subjected to the rigors of modern science, where you go through the process of proving its safety, bioavailability and the reproducibility, and then combining it with modern medicine. And I think that will be the new era medicine that hopefully will emerge from India in the coming decades.
Go ahead.
Last question, because we'd already stolen 5 extra minutes for this session. Gregory, just taking on from what Dr. Trehan was saying, is it plausible, for instance, if a Down syndrome child apparently has less occurrence of cancer than some other average, is it plausible that when you're doing this science, you pursue the prevention of disease, so you're isolating those kind of interventions rather than the ones which allow us to fashion what kind of characters our children will be or how they look? So, is it plausible to differentiate the research in this way?
I don't think that they're really differentiated, you can differentiate it, but any of the visions of enhancement and those kinds of things are really down the road. What people really care about is their health ultimately. And we've talked a lot about regulation, but most of what I've talked about is not, there's not a regulatory issue surrounding it at all. There are religious discussions that occur for something like embryonic stem cells, particularly they're very hot in the United States, where it's used as a stalking horse for the issue of abortion, which is very, very important to a lot of fundamentalist Christians, and people have great sensitivity about that issue. But ultimately, that union, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, the idea of Western medicine moving away from treatment of a disease. I mean, if you go in, once you've found that you have Alzheimer's, it's like you're walking into a house where the shutters come off and the termites have eaten it. Very difficult to develop any treatment. It's interventions that are in an earlier stage, which are preventive, and then there's a great deal of intersection between Ayurvedic medicine, where we're trying to actually alter the way we live in ways that can really contribute to longer health and life.
I'm sorry we have to wrap this up. Just to leave ourselves with a couple of thoughts. Gregory has written that if the hunter-gatherers had ever imagined that they would be living in New York and the kind of lifestyle they have, it would have seemed as terrifying as what it seems to us now to have scientists looking into embryonic research. And the other thought, of course, is what Dr. Trehan said, that medicine can be researching with as many $1 billion into other, hopefully less terrifying methods. And then there was another speaker we were going to call Ray Kurzweil, who believes that in another 20 years, man and machine will be indistinguishable, and we'll have arrived at the era of singularity. All of that and more next year. Thank you for listening in.